Hey, Bright Lights, welcome back to Architecting. On this episode, I am so excited to have two of my favorite new friends, Sydney Harris and Parker LaCombe. I met them at a behavioral health conference, saw them a week later at another conference, and we just really felt aligned in the work that they do and the passion they have for it. They are the co-founders of Mind Care Connect, which is a multidisciplinary consulting firm specializing in amplifying the voice of lived experience through co-design. So welcome, Sydney and Parker. So I
Hello there.
wanted to start off just having you explain what is lived experience.
Thank you so much, Angela. Lived experience is someone who has experienced significant life disruption due to maybe mental health or substance misuse challenges, the trauma that comes along with those things, all of that intersectionality. And so when we talk about somebody who has lived experience, especially for Mind Care Connect, that is somebody who has lived experience experiencing whatever service, built environment, or product that we are talking about.
Gotcha. So they are the boots on the ground. They've been through this. They know what it's like, and they also know maybe what it meant to get to a point where you had to go seek these services out.
That's exactly right. And I will tell you, my partner is a health equity specialist. So I'm going to tell us we are the sneakers on the ground. And so that's exactly right. So for me personally, I've experienced receiving services inside of psychiatric facilities. Not to brag, but I've been inside of inpatient hospital, as I have been inside of residential treatment facilities. I've been out to a weird camp that is now a hot topic on Netflix in the documentary Hell Camp. I went there. And so I have that experience of actually receiving services. And then for the last 8 years of my career as a peer support specialist, I worked inside of public health systems. And so I served inside of forensic psychiatric facilities. So inpatient facilities, very similar to those that I grew up in.
Sydney, what about you? How do you interpret lived experience, and what's the story behind your connection to it?
Yeah, so I met Parker on our project, the Austin State Hospital, that was done in Austin for 70 plus counties in Central Texas. And that's really where I started to learn more about people with lived experience and how much impact they can bring to not only the knowledge that I learned from Parker and everyone else in her circle, but from others that also have lived experience. And the insights that they bring to the spaces that they use from a facility to how their care is engaging with them and their care team engages with them. You know, Parker will probably speak a little bit later about certified peers, but they really have an importance in that co-creation of care with the person at the center. And it's so impactful for not only the person, but the team members and the person's family. So I've learned about it. I had heard about it, but I had never really been as touched and informed as I was on the Austin State Hospital project. So that's really where I think like the light bulb went off. And I was like, oh, yes, why are they not at every single table that we're engaging mental health at?
I always like to say nobody knows the needs of a community better than the people who are part of the community. And you can think you know, but it's a guess. So this led to the two of you forming Mind Care Connect. Now, would love to know, because you were both involved in the idea of using peers and the lived experience. Why did you feel you needed to create your own company?
You know, it's kind of interesting. Just as you said, you're not going to know as much about it until that person or that person that has lived through it and has experienced it. I don't know why there's not an organization out there that goes and finds those voices on a regular basis, especially for mental health services. Um, we had so much fun including people and learning from them and understanding what they needed. Was it done perfectly? No, by any means. There's no such thing as perfect, but people with lived experience did bring some aspects that we just didn't think about because I have never been that person with a lived experience. Um, and so we're like, why? I always ask this, why not? Like, why not do it? And help people, bring people with lived experience to the table in the design of the building and create some co-design aspects for a facility or operations or policies.
Yeah, one thing I bring up a lot, and so I'm going to get on my soapbox here for just a second, is every other industry for forever has included customer feedback as a part of their business process. Be that in research and development, be that in how can we do better. In every aspect, folks are and they're spending lots of money, right? Fortune 500 companies are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on things called a medallia survey. And when we get those as consumers, that feedback is actually transformed into data. It's transformed into how can we do better. And for whatever reason, not for whatever reason, because of stigma, people with lived experience have been left out of this conversation because the perspective has been that we are too angry, too sick, too confused, too insert word here to be able to have these conversations. And that's simply not true. The reality of it is we've had a lot of time to sit inside of those facilities and think about things that could be done differently. As a peer support specialist, when I was working on the Austin State Hospital redesign project with Sydney, one of the things that we really thought about was how do we make sure the facility is safe, right? This is a big concern of folks. How we incorporate people with lived experience. I can walk into a room and say, when I was sitting in this space, here are the things. And staff doesn't necessarily think of it that way, but we see the space incredibly different. When you live there all the time, you feel it and experience it differently. And I think that's why it's so important to have our perspective because it's just so different than everyone else who experiences the space.
Yeah, I mean, that's very true. My now ex-husband had a lot of issues. He has bipolar, and I remember a time he was hospitalized and he was traumatized by the other people that were there with him. He found their behavior terrifying. So was he really being helped by being in that setting or not?
Yeah, thank you for sharing your lived experience as a family member. I can imagine how challenging that is and how scary it is when you walk into a visitation space to see your loved one and you can hear the fear. I think a lot of us, some of us share the fears. I think some of us choose not to and hope we can will it to be better, or we don't want to scare our caregivers or what have you. And so that perspective, again, it's just incredibly valuable because yes, you don't realize how scary it is behind that closed door. But once it's locked, it feels different.
I'm sure. And also, just so many of these environments are so bleak and utilitarian. And the sad attempts at cheer are almost worse than if that faded print of a piece of artwork wasn't even there.
That's a great example.
Yeah, they're discolored by the sun, and you're just like, oh,
Yeah, I tell folks all the time, like it's honestly quite patronizing, right? There just becomes a time when it becomes quite patronizing. And one thing that I will share that's probably not as exhilarating through audio as it was in person, but in the conference that we all sat in together, there was a beautiful example of how we actually misunderstand this as folks with lived experience versus those who don't have it. And we were shown this idealistic project vision board that had these hyper pigmented colors and these beautiful, surreal, frankly, backgrounds. And a lot of folks said, "Oh, this is obviously what people want to see when they're sitting inside of these facilities." And every person with lived experience came back and said, "Absolutely not. I do not want to pretend like I'm in some AI generated." And I think actually what someone in the audience said was Microsoft background, you know. And so I think it can go to both extremes, and so we have to like meet it in the middle somewhere.
right. Or again, back to the equity idea, an image that seems appropriate, might be triggering to somebody if you don't understand the kinds of issues they're dealing with.
That's so true. And again, it's not just bringing one person's voice to the table. You have to bring multiple people, and it's not going to be perfect. You can't please everyone, but the point is to get as many individuals at that table with a different lived experience so you can find some form of balance and common ground. I know we often talked, I just want to make this point that we often talk about we're not replacing the physician-led design. We want people to be engaged with the physician-led design because it's a combination of both. So it's the staff, the physicians, it's the people's lived experience, and it's everyone that's going to be impacted by that space. So it's important to have everyone there that you can.
Absolutely. So a big buzzword these days is cultural competency, and that can mean a lot of things. And certainly it's whose culture, and the answer is going to be it depends, right? So there is no set it and forget it. We did this one time, we learned, and now we just keep going. So you really champion a concept called co-design. So tell us a little bit more about how you define co-design and why it's going to lead to a better outcome from a traditional design approach.
I never know who's going to come off mute first, Parker. I'll start off. So when we spoke in Baltimore, where we met you, Angela, we kind of have this, how loud can you turn up the volume for that person with lived experience? So you can ask them, we just want your thoughts. That's that's your thoughts, but where's the feedback loop going to happen? The next is, we want your thoughts and we want you at the table. So we're going to get more insights from you. And then eventually it gets to, we're turning up the volume so loud that you are there from the start of the project all the way through to the end, allowing that feedback loop, which is where co-design is coming from. And so it's not just your thoughts, it's your thoughts. It's how do you feel in this space? It's do you like the design on paper? Do you like the design when you're touching the walls and pulling out the drawer or using that handle? Because sometimes those ligature resistant handles are really hard to open that door, but they have a purpose. So it's bringing them and it's bringing people with lived experience throughout the whole entire process and the staff and the physicians to make sure that it's a feasible space and at the end that it's used as it was designed for. I think often at least in our experience, we are seeing designs that had so much thought put into them. And then at the end, once people have moved into their space, it's actually not being used at all for the same purpose. And I wonder if more voices were at that table, would the design have been different and used more efficiently? And I think that's what you get with co-design is you have a space that was designed as the architect and designers wanted it to be, and the people that will be using the space. So then you get more use out of what was intended.
Yeah, and one thing I think that Sydney has said that's really important is that everyone means everyone, right? And so for us, co-design does not mean we are replacing people who are at the table, who have historically been at the table in all of these conversations. It simply means that we're making room for others. And so, as a peer supporter, when I was getting involved in these conversations, and certainly now as the co-founder of Mindcare Connect, Sydney's right. We're not just looking for Parker's lived experience that was super relevant to her that one time, but rather we are working on consistently gathering our pool of candidates and lived experience experts is consistently growing so that we are reaching the masses. We're reaching folks in rural areas. We're reaching folks in urban spaces. And one thing that's incredibly important is that we've been tokenized for a long time. And so part of the reason that co-design and this conversation is so important is to understand why we need this. Again, our voices have been systemically silenced for a long time. And folks who had come out, even as far back as there's a great advocate named Clifford Beers, who was an amazing, when they were in the asylum days, he was a wonderful advocate who was coming out and saying, the treatment here is incredibly inhumane. This is very wrong. But because of the way that he said it and the way that it all came out, it was ignored. And that is exactly what has happened for so long. And so now we're saying, where is the power? Why haven't people with lived experience been able to actually be decision makers at the table? So we took that step forward where we started consulting folks with lived experience. We started kind of throwing out these things. Do you like this color or this color better? Does this feel better? Does that feel better? Which is nice, and giving us options is wonderful. We teach parents to do that to toddlers, right? That's a great option sometimes. But there's a difference between power and the illusion of power, and coming to us when decisions have already been made, when budgets are already set, when timelines are already signed off on. We now know we have no actual power at that table. And so, again, part of our goal as MCC is to bring folks in from the get go, to have people ready to rock and roll, to have these conversations. Because, yeah, one thing that we learned through the ASH project and through some of our other projects was the more that you bring people in, and I can give a great example of this. We were looking at one of our rooms that we were building, and we said, do we want this mirror in the corner? And I said, absolutely not. That looks like a camera. And I think it's weird. And I think it would really freak people out. And so we built a mock up bedroom, and I brought cohorts of patients into the space. And I said, what do you guys think about it? And they were like, if that prevents a staff member from opening our bedroom door right here, right now, absolutely, we want the mirror. And that is why it's so important that we bring all the voices to the table, because it's just incredible. Because you go, oh yeah, duh, that makes sense. One of the things that we recognize that we really needed, and we push for now in all of our facilities, is digital clocks, because a lot of folks can't tell time on analog clocks. My teenage daughter can't tell time on an analog clock. But yet we ask people, make sure you're getting to class on time, make sure you're getting to the med window on time. We want you to take that autonomy and have that responsibility, but yet we're not providing them the tools to do that. But if you don't have that perspective and you're not hearing from folks, because frankly, it's kind of embarrassing to say, oh, the reason I don't get to class on time is I can't tell time on that clock. But again, as the sneakers on the ground in the facilities, as I'm talking with folks and I'm able to capture that, we're like, oh, that's an easy solution. Are digital clocks more expensive? Yes. Is the investment entirely worth it? Absolutely.
Yeah, I think what you're both bringing up is the idea, and I see this all the time in every kind of project I do, but certainly is really profound in behavioral health settings, the unintended consequence, right? We all design with the best of intentions, but when I go back to a project after it's been built and in operation, sometimes I am shocked at some of the things I see, because they are not using the space the way that it was intended to be used. That could be because there just was not training of the staff, or they didn't have buy-in. But sometimes we solve one problem and create another. So what I'm hearing is that there's no magic bullet that's going to guarantee your design works, but by involving a peer support person in a co-design process that really does go start to finish, you're going to have maybe less surprises in the end.
That's a great point, Angela. And you bring up the peer. So oftentimes Parker and I get this question all the time. Well, who do we talk to? Who do we bring to the table? Um, and I'm gonna let Parker say more about this because this is her wheelhouse. I will say that certified peers are growing in America as a form of the workforce in the mental health system. They're amazing. And that is a great group of people to tap into, especially the ones that are already in the hospital or in the space that you will be designing them for. So, Parker, I'm going to pass the mic to you and let you add more on that.
Oh, I like that. I see what you did there. Peer supporters. I am a peer support specialist by training. I became a peer supporter in 2015, and I became certified in 2018. I've worked in community-based settings as a peer supporter, and then more recently, I worked in public health spaces. And I went from being a contracted peer support specialist when we weren't allowed to be full-time employees to a full-time employee, and I supervised teams and ultimately became the director for the state hospital system for peer support. And now I get to beat bop around towns and help build peer support infrastructure, help build peer support teams, because like Sydney said, we're certainly a growing workforce. And so to be clear, as peer support specialists, we adhere to SAMHSA, or the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, core values and ethics and scope of practice. It's also endorsed by what was formerly the National Association of Peer Supporters. And I also just want to shout out October, the third Thursday in October every year, which this year lands on October 16th, is Global Peer Support Celebration Day. This is the 11th annual Global Peer Support Celebration Day. There are 30 different countries that participate in this. Last year here in the city and county of Denver, we had a beautiful proclamation reading, and I know lots of cities around the country, and like I said, around countries around the globe, take part in this, because we are still very much a growing discipline. And I will not get on my soapbox about this right now. However, I will just say, Dr. I'm going to go here. Dr. Felipe Pinel is actually known as the godfather of psychiatry. And in the Bistic Hospital in Paris, France, at the same time that he was developing the concepts that we now know as psychiatry, he also is known as kind of the original founder of peer support services. He was the first person to take what he called a recovered patient. And I that was his language. I do not think that it's ever an ended journey. But he took what he called a recovered patient, and he said, I want her to become a staff member to be able to show that, number one, people can and do recover. And number two, also help the staff understand this is a person, right? And they're no different than you and I. And so I always like to give credit where credit is due, because in 2015, Angela, I believe that I invented peer support. But I did not. It was something that has been done for a long, long time now. And so the reason that connecting with peer supporters in the design process is so important is because they have access to all of their folks. And so oftentimes we think of gathering data in this very professional, official, academia kind of way. And that's hard. It's hard. Everybody will tell you it's hard to get access to individuals receiving services. Oftentimes the client or where the folks are living are actually the barrier to accessing their opinions and their thoughts. And this is why contacting peer support was so great, because I was cutting across the patient patio and I would say, hey, magic wand, if you could put anything in this building that would help you achieve recovery, what would it be? And I would just jot down these notes. We would do peer support groups inside the facilities where we would just talk about like what could be done differently. Hey guys, I have an opportunity to sit on the peer and family work group for the redesign of this facility. What would you want designers to know and to understand? And so I get to come to the meeting every month with 30, 60 voices and say, oh, here are some new thoughts that we have. Peer supporters have that relationship that they can go in. Peer supporters also are direct care staff in a lot of ways in these facilities. So they also understand that angle. I was able to learn some of the challenges of our nursing staff, things that I never would have thought of when I was a patient inside the facility, and things I never would have thought of otherwise. But when I'm working side by side with those folks and we're all, working 10-hour shifts and we're exhausted together, you learn and you start to see differently. And so I think that's one of the really important things to talk about also when we talk about lived experience and bringing those things to the table. We at MCC certainly also consider folks delivering those services as a very unique perspective that is also, important to include in this conversation. But again, peer supporters have the relationship, they have the ability to go in there, and they're people who are professionally trained, right, to be able to come to these tables and have these conversations. So these are professionals in the space, and their power of kind of making room for others at the table is really quite magical.
Yeah, like makes me think of the idea of how important it is to have trust. And we know this in any business relationship, any relationship, honestly. If there's no trust, there's no relationship. And we focus a lot on building trust with our clients, but are we thinking about building trust with the people who are going to use the space? And I include staff in this too, because we have to work really hard in workshops to make sure that we are asking questions or doing exercises in such a way that people will tell us what they really think, not what they think we want to hear or what they think their boss wants to hear them say.
The power dynamics are incredibly important in this conversation. And I just want to visit that for a second because there is a de facto power that exists in spaces, right? And so to give you an example, the last project that we worked on, the steering committee for this project included the sheriff, the county judge, the superintendent of the hospital. These are super educated, the medical director, right? We're talking about highly credentialed people. We're talking about a person who walked in with a gun on their side. The nicest sheriff I've ever, I just adore her. Shout out. She's always lifted our work and she had a weapon on her side. Right. And that's a scary thing for people with lived experience to walk into. And so one thing that we have learned that is incredibly important is how do you equalize? How do you make sure that we're all on a level playing field? And so we have no problem, I mean, saying most things actually, but we have no problem saying to folks, you know, this is no space for ego. This is a check your ego, check your title at the door. This is a we are all here with one mission and we are all here for the same reason. And everyone's voice matters. Some folks are totally comfortable speaking up in these meetings. Some people are not. So giving people virtual options that while the conversation is happening, they can be on their phones with that QR code participating in the conversation, but in a way that is comfortable for them and allows them to be authentic. Because you bring up a great point. If someone's superior is sitting in this space, if I'm a person with lived experience and I'm sitting amongst credentialed professionals, if I am, you know, there's so many different power dynamics at play here. And you're exactly right. If we can't cut through that, we'll never get to that place of vulnerability and psychological safety that allows us to really understand the challenges in a greater way. And so I think that is an incredibly important point to really be intentional around when we're talking about the design process.
And also that the feedback that is being provided is being used. I mean, I can't tell you how many times as architects, we will work with a client that wants to engage the community. Great, we have a listening session. And like you said, it's not co-design, it's a listening session. But if the things that come out of that listening session do not show up in any way, shape, or form in the project, you're not going to get the community to participate again because they not only feel a little bit of betrayal, but they feel you wasted their time.
Yeah, we don't want to waste anybody's time. And so the best thing I could recommend in that aspect is as painful as it would be to have them come back and spend more time with you, but I think closing that loop as to why some things were not selected. I I mean, how many times do you have to go through value engineering and cut things out because of cost? But if you explain to the reason why it was cut, oftentimes in some of the projects we've been on, it was cut because putting funding towards what was needed for the patient or the person receiving the care was more important than, I don't know, a latch on this window or that was in the administrative suite or something to that aspect. So explaining to them, otherwise people have the tendency to just fill their minds with, well, why wasn't it selected? Oh, it's because they don't like this region of the town, or, oh, I shared my story and that cut out that thing that I really wanted in the space. And it's not that oftentimes. It's literally down to value engineering for the cost. Sometimes someone else gets your plumbing materials that you need before you needed them, and then you have to spend more money to stay on time. Like there are so many things that go into the construction of a really large facility or even small facilities. And if you don't have that feedback loop, people are just going to fill in the blank spaces as to why what they wanted is not in that space. So again, just close the loop with the individuals that you're meeting with, even if it takes another town hall or another listening session. But what you can say is, we kept these, and highlight all the things that you kept from that conversation, even if they're down to the smallest little aspect, and then also share, this is why we couldn't bring in these 5 things. And it's helpful.
Yeah, I think that that's a really powerful suggestion that often gets overlooked. It's like, yeah, thank you for your feedback. And then we never connect again. So closing that loop goes a long way. Now, Sydney, I know you have more of a background working within health systems and maybe more in the administrative point of view. So how do we assess when something's having an impact? Because like you said, limited dollars, limited schedules, there's all kinds of constraints on projects. So how do we make those high value decisions?
Well, one thing that we learned in the Austin State Hospital project we had principles, but our first principle, our North Star, was the person first. And that is the person receiving the care or the person that's going to be delivering the care. And so every nitty gritty question down to the toilet dispenser paper roll, the toilet seat, the handrail. I mean, we went down to the nitty gritty as to, well, does it impact the person receiving the care or the person providing the care? And if it did, how do we make it happen? What else can we cut? Because we want this person receiving the care to have the best aspect possible, and we want the person delivering the care to enjoy what they're doing and being in a space that they can provide the highest quality of care because of the building that we're putting together for them. So I highly recommend always looking at the person first as your North Star. Yes, you're going to have conversations about the dollars. I mean, you're going to have conversations about the dollars even before you have the architect, even before you have the contractor. I mean, the dollars are always going to be important, especially on public funded projects. However, if you're always pointing towards who is this building for, ultimately, yes, it's for the client that's paying the bills, but it's actually for the people that are going to be getting their care there. And so, how do you make something that will last years for not just the population that's going to be moving in there tomorrow, but for years beyond? Because these buildings last and need to last for hundreds and hundreds of years. So, how do you make something evergreen that is based on the person?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, is there a way we can understand? So great, we go through this process, the project opens. How do we go back and learn from how it plays out once it's in use?
I would ask your clients, can we come back? Can we come back and do and not the warranty phase, that has to happen, but how do we come back 3 months, 6 months, a year from now, from opening, from being in, and asking them, maybe having those day-long sessions just as you did when you're designing the building, but having day-long sessions of like, we want to hear from you. What worked? What didn't work? What did you immediately change? What changed maybe 6 months later? What are some things you wish that you had cut and had kept, but cut because of funding or whatever? Um, and ask them that. It's hard. You designed that building, someone built that building. I can't imagine being like, okay, 360 review on something I spent several years on. But then what you can get is feedback on that building and then do it again in the next building and just continually improve. And, it's lessons learned. Nothing's perfect. It won't ever be perfect as much as you try to make it perfect. It won't be perfect. But what you can do is just try harder the next time and do something different and better the next time than what the great thing you just created. And I think by learning from not only the staff and the physicians and the people with lived experience that are receiving the care there, because that cohort's going to change. And if our system is adapting, as I'm hoping it will, it's slow to adapt, but if the mental health system continues to improve slowly but surely, then the design also will change throughout the years. And so you're going to have to see, how does that cohort that's coming through need to adapt the design for the care that they're receiving for their recovery.
Yeah, so there's lessons learned for sure. And I loved a lot of the suggestions you made that go beyond a typical post-occupancy evaluation. But it's not just, okay, now we keep tweaking the template and using it like a cookie cutter. We still need to go through the co-design process, but maybe what we're bringing to the table initially is a little better formed, or maybe if we hear a suggestion, no matter who it's coming from, we have a little bit better perspective on how to respond to that suggestion.
Yes,
Okay,
I
yeah.
think, yeah, the more information you can gather and use what will be better for the next facility or design is always going to enhance each time.
So what do we want to achieve? And feel free to share examples if you have them in terms of how do we want a space we're designing in behavioral health to make the person receiving care feel? Parker, let's start with you.
Thank you. That's a great question and so important. The opposite of addiction is not recovery, it's connection, it's community. And one thing that I think is kind of quite silly, to be frank, is that we put people in the, whether it's figurative or literal, padded room, and then we are shocked when they go back into the community and they don't know how to assimilate. And so I always tell folks that a compliant patient does not equal a recovered patient, right? Because if I am compliant inside of the facility, but all I am is compliant, then that recovery belongs to the facility, because the second that I leave, it is not mine. When you are inside experiencing inpatient facilities, your autonomy is ripped away, your self-respect, your respect, your dignity. I have to ask someone to unlock a bathroom. And then sometimes I'll say, can you unlock the bathroom? And the staff will turn around and say, why? Right? It's loud. It has awful smells no matter what. To your point earlier, we're talking about sometimes 20, 30 people, 40 people, adults in shared bedroom spaces, in very tight, close corners, people at varying levels of their own recovery. And so one thing that's incredibly important in order for us to gain our recovery is autonomy. It is being able to learn how to do for ourselves, how to think for ourselves. Because for so long, we are in this institutional setting and our brain becomes hardwired to do not question, because if you question, you're a difficult patient. If you think for yourself, we don't want you to do that. We want you to do what we said to do. Don't think about anything else. We want you to do what we said to do. And that just does not equal recovery. And so spaces should be designed with recovery in mind, but we have to understand what that means. Recovery does not mean sobriety. Recovery does not mean, all these things that we have subscribed to it over the years. Recovery, per SAMHSA, is self-directed wellness. That means I know what wellness is for me. I know the tools that I need to engage in order to get there. I understand that recovery is not linear. I've been in long-term recovery now for 18 years, and it is not a linear process. And as a peer support specialist, as a person with lived experience, it's incredibly important that I let folks know that, because oftentimes we go into these facilities that convince us that compliance and doing what you're supposed to do is what recovery is. And so if you fall down, that means you failed. And that is not the case. And I think that these facilities, especially when we're talking about inpatient settings, right? This is where we want people to practice the skills. This is exactly where we want folks to experience the fall down so that they're surrounded by support in order to get back up. And so we have to stop looking at, and we hide behind the word safety. And we say, no, we're designing with safety in mind. And oftentimes when you kind of pry at that and you push, what people really mean is compliance. How do we build an environment that corrals people to do what we want them to do in the way that we want them to do it? That is not recovery. And so when we're talking about how the space feels, it should feel like a place that I can come in and I'm safe to be vulnerable. I'm safe to fall down here. I'm safe to be exhausted here, because I know that I'm going to be picked up. I know that I'm going to be supported. And that feeling starts from the moment that you pull up to the facade of a building, what the parking lot feels like, what the drive-in feels like. Were there big metal chains as I was coming in the door? Does the person at the reception desk feel the need to have plexiglass between me and them? Am I so unsafe that when they're bringing me into the safe facility, even I'm not safe to be here? Now we have to, do all these things. And so when it comes back to how things should feel empowering. As a person with lived experience, never did I feel comforted or safer or healthier or more well when I was just following the rules and doing what I was supposed to do. Because oftentimes, and we spoke to this earlier, design and operations are not the same thing, right? And so we have to be really mindful of all of those kinds of things. And again, how are we bringing that all from the get-go to the table together? And so when we talk about what it should feel like recovery. It should feel like connection, and it should feel like community, because those words are synonymous with recovery.
That is such a powerful definition. Thank you for that. In my own work with Salutogenesis, two of the aspects, prospect and refuge, which is all about psychological safety, defensible space, feeling like you have choices, and self-efficacy, which is, like you were saying, it's about power dynamics, it's about believing you can, are two things that I've always said were important in behavioral health. And hearing that, it's like those are beautiful examples of exactly why. So it really does underline, I think, that we're not designing for the staff to feel safe alone. I mean, that is important, but sometimes what makes the staff feel safe is actually sending a very damaging message to the person working on their recovery.
Absolutely. And I do just want to address this really quickly. I just had a conversation last week with an outreach street team, and their street team members were going out in bulletproof vests. And people, as they were being approached, were like, oh my God, what's going on? Why are people with bulletproof vests coming? And not realizing, oh, they're coming because they're scared of you. But then very quickly, like that feeling, if you're coming at me with a bulletproof vest, I feel that I am in danger. There is danger around. Um, that does not feel good. When we're coming into spaces, one thing I challenge spaces on all the time, I saw staff bathroom next to inside of a nurse's station. Inside of a locked nurse's station, the sign said staff bathroom. And I went into the bathroom, and there's absolutely nothing different between this bathroom and what would be a patient unit bathroom. And so I asked, why did we label this staff bathroom? And they said, oh, just so people know. And I said, the patients are never back here without staff. Patients are never really in the nurse's station, period, on that. And so what was the purpose of othering that space? And so sometimes the power dynamic also is we've othered the space. And that cannot happen, because folks receiving mental health care services are literally just people. And if you are in a forensic environment, if you are in wherever you are serving people with behavioral health needs above all else. It's important that we're treated like people. And that feels very elementary. That feels very obvious. But things like labeling the bathroom staff bathroom versus a patient bathroom, although they're exactly the same, we've othered them. And so I do think that you bring up a really good point, a point with that.
Well, I love what you're both doing with MindCare Connect, because you saw a gap and you're saying we need to do more of this. This should ideally happen on every single project. So tell us a little bit about how people can reach out to you and learn a little bit more about MindCare Connect, and most importantly, work with you.
Yes. So Mindcare Connect is mindcareconnect.org. You can find us online. Parker and I are both very vivid on LinkedIn. So find it Mindcare Connect on LinkedIn. Find Parker and I. I'm Sydney Harris. She's Parker LaCombe. And yes, all of our information is out there, and we're excited to share with others what we're trying to do in the space of design and operations. It doesn't have to just end in design. To bring more people with lived experience and amplify their voice at the table.
Fantastic. And I'll also put this in the show notes so you can visit those and find all of this information as well. Well, thank you both for coming on today and for really, I think, illuminating a lot that we don't often think about in a traditional design process. And even if you are not designing behavioral health spaces, I want to stress to our audience what we heard today shows why we need to hear from the people who use the space. It really shows why we can't make assumptions about what people want or what people need. We need to build into our process so we can hear directly from them.
That's right. In peer support, we say nothing without us, nothing about us without us. So anything that includes folks with lived experience, there should be people with lived experience at the table.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again for coming on, for helping us to really understand this in a way that I've not heard it explained before. So I really appreciate that. And I'm sure the audience does too.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angela.